Well, thanks for hosting me, and thanks for inviting me to, or hosting this event and inviting me to talk. As you said, I'm an architect and I have specialized in lights and health because, yeah, actually it started with me as a patient in a Danish hospital some 20 years ago, where I was admitted to hospital and really found the lighting very, very frustrating and not so, what you can say, stimulating for health. So that's started my career as a lights architect. So that's why I practically since this 20 years ago have practiced lighting in architecture. And well, my approach is that lights and architecture has played a very essential role earlier, and I would like to demonstrate some historical aspects on that because light and architecture was very closely related to health around 1900. Anyway, I'll try to see if I can change my slides. Normally when I hold a lecture, I show the Pioneer Sanatorium because that's really it's a good example of healing architecture and natural surroundings, natural daylight and natural ventilation working kind of in a symbiosis, almost orchestrated by in this case Alvar Aalto, who drew this building in 1933. So it was before any vaccination of tuberculosis existed, and the patients were admitted mandatory to cure their illness of tuberculosis, and their stay was several months. So they stayed in this hospital with the only cure actually being the UV light of the sun combined with natural ventilation, very high air change per hour to reduce the staff from getting contaminated by this bacterial disease. It was pioneered, this knowledge about light and the bacteria was pioneered by Downson Plant in 1877. They wrote a famous paper about the influence of lights on bacteria. And coming from Denmark, I have to mention Niels Ryberg Finsen, a Danish doctor who received the Nobel Prize in 1903 for actually putting this knowledge into practice, curing skin tuberculosis, a very vicious disease in the skin, deforming the skin, and the operation was only making it worse. So Finsen, he discovered that lights passively, of course, actively, chemically could cure this disease. And that spawned, Niels Ryberg Finsen's work spawned modernism as we know it today. I hope there's some architects present, but anyway, the three elements was light, air, and then natural surrounding, and it should be distributed democratically in the new order of like the modernism was starting in the 1920s. And some of the highlights of this modernism was actually hospital buildings, highlighting how we should live more healthy in this new modernist world. This is the Spectral Sanatorium in Switzerland. It was originally drawn by Deuker, Dutch architect, for diamond workers who had been infected with lung tuberculosis. They were polishing diamonds, and this dust was ripping up their lungs, very, very hard dust. And the tuberculosis, once it got in their lungs, it was very difficult to cure. So they got this stay at this hospital. Actually, many of them got cured. It was a sanatorium with special glass quality. It had Vita glass, it's called, very, very high transmittant glass. I was there together with Klaus Martini to visit the hospital some years ago. They had just recently been renovated. But what happened was actually that in the in the wartime in 1945, in the post-war time, vaccines for tuberculosis was cheap and cheaply distributed worldwide. So these sanatoriums actually decayed. They were left abandoned. They were sold for $1, sometimes $2, in order just to get rid of these buildings and hopefully make some new, activities around these very beautiful, but also misheld architectural buildings. This is how it looked in the 60s. So it was renovated recently in 2012, back to normal. But what happened in this period is also very interesting, because I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the building typologies, the footprints of the buildings in this post-war period changed, so that we had this slender building shapes, H-shaped, C-shaped, L-shaped, O-shaped buildings were gradually becoming more deep plan buildings. We also see that the ceiling height is being reduced in this post-war period, so the daylight is no longer as important as it was in these sanatoriums, where recommended ceiling height was 4.2 meters, which is quite a lot today. Now it's 2.7 in Denmark. This is a short sketch of this development, only to point out the line pointing out actually Downson Plant and Finsen and how they related to this modernist architecture. Not only hospitals, but also schools were designed according to this. Then came the vaccines and the antibiotic age, as we call it, antibiotic killing bacteria. And then we saw no architectural development for a long time when it came to health. It was like architecture was disconnected from this health regime that it originally was very, very close to. And only recently, in 2002, with the discovery of the missing piece in the lighting puzzle, we have seen this sort of belief in architecture and the physical surroundings, that they actually are very important to us and to our health, is sort of coming back. At the same time, we also measure the light in this historical line. We start measuring the light in lux after the war, because we are no longer so dependent on the sun. We are starting to have more and cheaper electricity and electrical lighting, and we start measuring light, and we start actually lose the orientation of the building. So that if a building is facing north or east or south or west, it really doesn't matter in this post-war period, because we can just mend it by adding some artificial lights. So the importance of the sun and solar architecture is, you can use the word forgotten in this period. Actually, this is one of my favorite examples, because in Denmark in 1920, we had this hospital. You can see the layout here to the left, where it was really orientated towards the morning sun, because that is stimulating not only to health, but also to sleep, as we know today, and to warming up the building when it was cold in the morning. And facing the winter sun, so that the sun during the cold period could heat up the original buildings from 1920. But we see that this is the footprint of a modern building, a new building laid in the middle of the garden, completely in another direction, so that the wards is not facing southeast anymore. They are facing northeast, where there's no morning sun in the winter, and southwest, where actually there is no morning sun at all. So basically, this is an example of buildings losing their original orientation. This is an example, an early example. That is the hospital that I was admitted to 20 years ago. It was a ward like this. So yeah, southeast is at the end of the corridor. The corridor is, yeah, what is it? 150 meters long, and then you have wards on both sides, so there's no daylight in this yeah, wards, sorry, corridors. To sort of re-establish this what you call anchoring the buildings to the corners of the world again, or trying to make the sun or the solar architecture re-established and encourage architects and planners to take the sun into considerations. I developed a method in my time at the architectural school, at my PhD, and the tool I will show film of. I think it will work. This is the clock. Sorry. This is the clock. So it all starts at midnight, because at midnight, I don't know if you have noticed that, but at midnight the sun is in the north. It's quite interesting. We are having our deepest sleep during the early hours of our sleep, and also our temperatures are lowest. But on the top film, you see summer setting in Denmark is 56 latitude north, and we actually get morning sun very early. Below this equinox, where equinox we have 12 hours of light, 12 hours of dark, and that actually fits better to the high rise in the blood pressure and the serotonin onset that we just passed. And as we move on until midday, we see that east-facing and south-facing rooms actually are stimulating serotonin and the wake process better than west and north-facing rooms. And then, after a period of a lot of things going on in our body, we have a stable period from midday and the rest of the afternoon where nothing much takes place when we're talking circadian rhythm. Only that when we actually are close to getting to sleep, we have a higher blood pressure and a higher body temperature. And you can imagine a west-facing room with sun coming in at the same time as we have the highest body temperature and need for melanin to onset so we can sleep. That is not so beneficial for our circadian system. So that basically was what I discovered using this method. And also I found, of course, that I've not shown winter, but I've shown summer, that summer actually can disrupt, or you can say challenge this natural body rhythm. That method we took on, I brought on to a hospital in New Herlev Hospital, where I was working with the facades together with Henning Larsen architects, where we planned the facades according to north, south, east, and west. It was a round building, the round building in the middle. And this is the layout of the building, a small building with a lot of wards, and then a support building with less and family wards, etc. We were really trying to incorporate north, south, east, and west, and we made some facades and simulations of how the windows should look like. We turned out with a layout of, you see, south is 25% glass area, while north is 50% glass area, to sort of democratically give light to the regions where there was very little light. So north having very little light, we plan for better or larger glass openings. We also reintroduced the clear glass from the sanatoriums. And yeah, we tried to make a hospital which is in its layout completely symmetrical. We tried to make it asymmetrical solar architecture, because any solar architecture, as I showed you in the first slide with the Pioneer Sanatorium, actually is to some extent asymmetrical in nature, simply because there's a difference between morning and sun. So we made, instead of horizontal windows, you see upright, we actually changed the windows to down right, the rendered building where it's actually vertical windows, very tall windows, letting in the daylight. And we also, in this method, actually accepted the fact that we need darkness, because darkness is an important issue, maybe under addressed when we're talking light and health, because in a huge building made out of only glass, as you see to the right top, this over exaggerating, or you can say optimizing daylight actually comes with a price, because as I showed you in the film, we also need darkness. So walls and the planning of the placement and the size of windows is extremely important when we're talking light and health. So darkness, we have to remember that darkness is 1/3 of our lived 24-hour cycle. So we have to create, look at darkness also. These are just stills from the process. Actually, these are from the model I made on the roof of the hospital, where you see the different window sizes, and also very tall windows at the top compared to a lower window in the bottom. And here we have the winter, equinox, and summer. Also trying to balance for the summer, of course, not creating overheating, but at the same time avoiding that the patient should get too little light. So it's a balance. We try to balance the light. Actually, we also added asymmetrical artificial lighting so that you can see. Can show on the mouse maybe without. Here on the top, here these four, we actually made different artificial lighting according to the corners of the world, so that the artificial light and was dynamic light was a result of the planning of daylight. So, okay. Yeah, just because I would like to show you this, I think this is a good example. This is artificial light in a monster card. Today we can actually address all these colors simply by LED, tunable LED. So you can see how they change. The colors are the same on the monster card, but yeah, at least to me, it's fascinating to see this magic trick of light, that we can actually change colors and change perception of colors only by stimulate or by activating different RGB LEDs. Quite beautiful, I think. Okay, I move on. Klaus Martini and I, we were looking at this old grid, old layout, and how does it affect patients? Because of course, what I've spoken to you about now is mainly historical facts and theoretical facts. So let's put it into practice, and we took this building. It's a building from 1920, and the building is facing southeast. And the reason why it's facing southeast is, as you can see here, that the whole facade of the building is actually receiving the winter sun. So the facade was planned for the winter sun. It's not a coincidence that the grid is ending here and it's opening up to the sun, so that the solar path here, 8 hours of sunlight, actually can penetrate to the patient rooms. All patients were in big wards at that time in the 20s, there were 26 beds, wards. But of course, today we've changed it to single and double patient rooms. And that has created a bright side and a dark side. So this is shown here that we actually have the bright side, which I unfortunately have painted black. Sorry about that. It should be white. And the dark side facing northwest, that in this case is bright. So we wanted to see if any effect of this. This is the southeast facing ward, and this is the northwest facing ward. The distribution of light during the day, that if this huge difference in light also had an effect on the patients. This is the left one is summer, and the right one is equinox. You can see that very little sun is coming northwest at equinox compared to southeast. This is how they looked during the day. Morning lights and then evening lights to the right. You can see the time of, the time of day, the time of day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then actually it continues below 13, 14, 15, 16. And you can see that the southeast facing, which is the top, is actually receiving all the morning sun, of course, and the northwest facing wards of face are getting very little and actually very late daylight. So we also measured the spectral distribution. I will not go into details, but we of course found that because of daylight, we had a huge difference in the shortwave lights, as you can see here, between southeast and northwest. A huge difference in the morning light. Of course, much more short spectral light stimulating the phase advance of the day, of the diurnal rhythm. And in the northwest facing room, very little. And actually also a lot of lights very late, where it might be too late in the northwest facing rooms, because here it starts to interrupt perhaps with the night sleep of the patients. Okay, just to show the spectral. What we found was that after 1 year, we made up the numbers and looked at the duration of the hospitalization of the patients. We found an average of 29.2 days in the southeast facing wards and 58.8 days in the northwest facing wards. So it's a huge difference between these two orientations. It's a weak study. We do not know why it is like that. We have not made any clinical trial. It was a cohort study where we just followed the patients. But anyway, the difference is quite remarkable, and of course can be explained by light, and also maybe other factors we don't know. But light is essentially one of them. We also could see out of the data that half of the patients had vitamin D levels below recommended 50 nanomoles per liter. They had between 9 and 44 nanomoles, with an average of 32. And that is, of course, because they're spending so much time indoor. That made us, at least me, think, and also Klaus Martini think that maybe there's something wrong with our indoor environment, since they do not have access to UV light in the indoor environment. So they're actually low on vitamin D if they are spending too much time in the indoor. And that leads on to another project where we actually looked at special glass types transmitting UVB. A very interesting study. We made the headlines in the national news because of this. Found some interesting funds, mainly about energy, because it was sponsored by ELFORSK. ELFORSK is a national program for energy saving research. But we also found some differences when it came to vitamin D and sleep. So the buildings we looked at was in Haderslev in Jutland, small town, southern Jutland, 55 latitude north. 2 identical buildings. They look like this. This is one of the buildings. This is the time lapse showing. I think it's quite nice to see this evening how they shut down the lighting and fall to sleep gradually. And both buildings were the same. They were similar. They were built in 1956 and then renovated in the 90s. And then we had the chance to renovate them again in 2016, changing one of the buildings to very, very clear high transmittance Vita glass, and the other building to state-of-the-art energy glass, which in Denmark is a 3-layered coated glass. And it looked, if I go, the buildings looked like this. They were facing southwest, and that was originally planned because when the workers come home from work, they should, of course, have access to the sun. That was part of the plan. So both having glass facades facing southwest in this case. But building A, the top one, was equipped with 3-layered energy glass, and building B, the bottom, was equipped with 2-layered low iron diamond glass or Vita glass. You see the light transmittance is much higher and the G value is much higher with the 2-layered glass. That means that at least from the data, there should be a lot more light in the building B. This is the facade drawing. We looked at daylight quality. We looked at temperature, air humidity, overall health, comfort, energy consumption, and life cycle assessments. I will only focus on daylight quality and overall health and comfort and energy consumption here. But this is how they look before renovations. Actually quite clear glass. I don't know if you can see, but it's quite clear glass. It's an old glass window. Not so optimized because of energy demands as we do now, simply because it's a 2-layered glass, not a 3-layered glass. Then we, of course, changed to a 3-layered glass, which you see in the middle, and a 2-layered, very, very high transmittant glass that you see to the right. And what's interesting, if we just can make a stop here, then please look at the ceiling, white ceiling, how greenish it gets when you have 3 layers of tinted, it is a bit greenish glass in itself, and how little green it is when you have this very high transmitting glass where you actually have no iron, no greenish tint to the right. Another thing is you can see the surroundings there may be appearing less green outside with the 2-layered compared to the 3-layered glass. Here are the glass types. We chose 2-layered to the left, low iron, then a 3-layered low iron as a reference. We did not use it in the buildings, we only used it as a reference in the middle. And then we used the 3-layered low energy glass in the other building to the right. And the results, we looked at, of course, the visual daylight, 380 to 780 nanometers. We looked at melanopic and rhodopic light, equivalent daylight intensity. We looked at UVB and also the heat transmission in order to establish energy consumption. Okay. And if you look at the visual daylights, the top one is baseline. You actually see that there was a difference, although both buildings had the same glass in the baseline, there was a difference between buildings at baseline. But at the effect measurement, we saw that this difference was much larger. when we changed, the red one is 2-layered glass, low iron, and the blue one is 3 layers. So the difference was around 20% of the daylight level in lux. This is the apartment, how it looked like simulated daylight factors. So it was quite bright apartments, actually with a daylight factor of 8% down to 1%. So very bright apartments, but yeah, still it made a change what glass we were using. When it comes to daylight quality, we look at 3 things. We look at the UVB, which is the lowest region down here, and then the short spectral light stimulating the circadian daylight, I mean the melanopic lux. And then of course we also looked at the heat, which is the infrared at top here, at the end here. And if we look at the melanopic lux, what's interesting is this one, second one, the melanopic one. We actually could see that 3-layered glass, which is the yellow, transmitted much less than 2-layered low iron glass, which is the blue. So approximately 16% more daylight. And with a lux level outside of 10,000 lux, this equals around 200, 160 melanopic lux in difference. So quite a lot. In the UV spectrum, we also found that in this case, the 2-layered glass, which is blue, low iron, clear glass, actually transmitted UVB, which is 280 nanometers to 315, while all the other glass types, even the 3-layered glass with low iron, did not transmit UVB. So the number of layers actually have an influence on the UV amount, not only the glass quality. So it was quite interesting to see. When we looked at the energy consumptions, we expected that 2-layered glass would have a higher energy consumption simply because 3-layered glass is sold as energy glass, low energy glass, actually reducing the amount of heating for energy for heating. But we found the opposite in this study. We were quite surprised. We saw that if we look at 2014, 15, 16, and 17, that was before renovation. They were, in 2017 they were similar, but when we changed the glass from 17 to 18, it's this line here, then we actually saw that the building with 2-layered glass had a lower energy consumption than the building with 3-layered glass. It's quite a surprise. That's why one of the reasons why we made it to the national news. But if we looked at the explanation why, we tend to think that it's because if you look at the month here below, that when we are starting to gain sun from February to April, we are actually experiencing that the passive solar heat is reducing the amount of energy compared to 3-layered, because 3-layered glass is blocking the sun, the passive heat from the sun, while 2-layered is actually benefiting from the passive solar heat. That may be one explanation of this. If we looked at the health aspects, we looked at the 2 buildings. One building with an average age, the building with 3-layered glass having an average age of 70 years, 0.3 years, and the building with 2-layered glass having an average of 55 years, 55.4 years, and also a large 47.1 was working, while only 5.9 was actually employed in the building with 3-layered glass. So there was a huge difference in sociodemographics. One building with 3-layered glass was old people, old and tired people, and the building with 2-layered glass was younger and still working. What we found was that the people in the building with two-layer glass had more difficulties to work with two-layer glass. We don't know why, but perhaps because they were working more. That's a good explanation. They complained about that. Anyway, we also found that the people in the building with three-layered glass reported more difficulty sleeping on a scale from 0 to 3. They went from 0. They went from at least the people from with three-layered glass reported more difficulty sleeping after compared to the residents in the building with two-layered glass, which actually is supported by our daylight measurements, because we could see that they were receiving less light during the daytime. Results on comfort. Comfort was a bit most beneficial for three-layered glass. They thought the ventilation was better with three-layered glass. We cannot explain that because it should be the same. But anyway, it's a small study. We also found that they were more satisfied with three-layered glass on daylight color and furniture on colors of on daylight in the living room, which is kind of odd because we could see that the light was rendered in a different way than natural daylight. But anyway, that was what we found. We also found that people with two-layered glass experience days with too much cold in the apartment after renovations compared to before. But that we cannot explain either because they came from two-layered glass to better two-layered glass. So it should not have been the case. But anyway, that's what they reported. And this picture may be showing why they preferred the daylight with three-layered glass, because you can see it's much more green, as I mentioned earlier, to look out. But as I've tried to render here, it comes with a price of poorer daylight quality. Further research areas in this field could be to look at how these glass actually perform if we're talking about not only vitamin D, but also virus, bacteria, because this is a curve showing the germicidal spectrum of light, daylight, natural light. And it ranges from 285 to 315. You see, we actually have a germicidal effect, but the germicidal effect stops around 315 nanometers. And when we compare this with the findings we made on glass quality earlier, we can actually see that it's a problem that we have today in many buildings, glass types that do not act germicidal to viruses such as COVID-19 or just a normal virus, bacteria. And what we saw that might be an explanation of this is, in Denmark at least, this is the mortality of COVID-19 during the COVID pandemic. And we saw in 2020, in the autumn and in the winter, steep rise in mortality. And then as as the UV light came back and the solar heat came back and it became summer, and people opened the door and ventilated more and was out in the UV light, they were actually much less vulnerable to, there was a lot less mortalities. And then again, when the UV light disappeared, this is the 12th of September, starts disappearing, then the mortality again starts to rise. Very clear indication that spending time indoor during the pandemic is not a good thing. One can question why, but one explanation is that the glass simply do not transmit these germicidal UVB rays. The last example, I don't know how much time I have, Anna.
Yeah, I think if you could wrap up soon, that would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Just to show the current project where we are looking at a hospital now, together with Klaus Martini, we are trying to optimize both the artificial lighting and the ventilation, natural ventilation at the new hospital. And we do that, this is the ward, by having natural ventilation built in the ceiling here, the passive cool. It's a big problem with modern hospitals, they're too hot. So with natural ventilation, we can actually create a better atmosphere, especially before the sleep, that we can cool the building. We expect to cool it around 3 degrees in the evening, sorry. And we also using dynamic lights. This is examples of the lighting here, early examples of the light fixtures to stimulate the circadian rhythm. So we're both asking and reporting, hopefully getting results on temperatures and artificial light levels based on 1,000 patients. It's quite a huge project we're doing. We're having a baseline now, and we are changing the setting and expecting to include a total of 1,000 patients during 2 years. So that's further research. Hopefully we will be able to share these results on SATVR or maybe the Daylight Academy. Okay, if time is up, I could talk forever, you know, but I will round up maybe by this one. This is the last slide because I think this is so interesting. Here is the summer setting at 56 North. You see the top one is east, then you have south, then you have west, and then you have north. And below is the winter setting. You see the huge difference between summer, the 4 top ones, and winter in Denmark, the 4 bottom ones. Again, here it's east, south, west, and north. And actually, we are very, very concerned about the winter period here because we want to stimulate the circadian rhythm with artificial lighting in these projects. And the reason why we want to do it is because this is the fixed shutter speed and a fixed aperture, showing these tremendous differences in Denmark between summer, the 4 top ones, and winter, the 4 bottom ones. And if you look at north during the winter, you can imagine how dark this is compared to anything, but compared to this is the south and this is east. So you have a lot more lights here, south and east, east and south, and also west, but although a bit late, but still north is very poor. So we need to see how we can improve this setting. Thanks. Thank you.